I feel a little lonely up here. Everybody else has had a panel, of experts to sit there with them. So does anybody want to join me and be my panel? No, just kidding. We've only been here for a few hours already, but I think we've heard a lot of interesting, exciting things to think about, lots of information to digest. Artificial intelligence is a complicated topic, as Stephen mentioned. So I figured maybe we'd take a little step back, take a little breather, what's a presentation without a dancing baby? So this is actually my little guy here. He's makes me very proud here in this video, showing off his dancing skills. At the very end of the video, well, of course, he's right there at the wine fridge, already ready to start getting into that. So at the very end of the video here, he makes me very proud by proceeding to lick the floor there. So that's like I said, that's my son. And so why do I have a video of him? Well, so to think about how artificial intelligence, how chatbots, how these sorts of technologies are relevant today and how you can take this information back from this conference and make it a little bit more relevant and actionable for you, I want to take a step back and think about, before we found out, right when we found out that little guy was on the way for my wife and I, or right when we did find out, we said, okay, we're going to do something exciting. We want to take, one last trip. We're going to do kind of that baby moon. So we decided to start planning a big trip before our little guy came along. So we started looking into this trip. So who here knows what airline this is? Qantas, okay, good. So who knows the significance of Qantas Flight 8? Does anybody know? So at one point, Qantas Flight 8 was the longest flight in the world. It has now been surpassed. I think it's number 5 or 6 now. So it's the nonstop flight from Dallas all the way over to Sydney. So it's a long flight, almost 17 hours in the air. So as I was looking at planning this trip, I decided, let's go somewhere exciting. Let's go over to Australia, do a trip over there. So we ended up actually booking and flying on Qantas Flight 8 over to Sydney, cashed in a whole bunch of frequent flyer miles for the trip, so we're able to do it as comfortably as you can on a 17-hour flight in business class and things like that. So I was planning the trip, booked these flights all the way over to Australia, but I knew I wanted to see that part of the world. We wanted to, to see what was over there, and so we wanted to do both Australia and New Zealand for this trip. And so as I started planning it out, I realized that, okay, we'd fly to Australia first, and then we needed to go from Australia, from Melbourne, over to New Zealand. So I needed to now find a flight from Melbourne over to, we're going to start in Christchurch, New Zealand. So I started planning this flight, figuring out, okay, now that we're already going to be there, how am I going to get from Australia over to New Zealand? So I started exploring the flight options that there were. And so I found a flight from Melbourne to Christchurch, and as we all know with air travel these days, you have to be careful about, what are you going to get actually when you pay for your ticket? Are you going to, what's actually included? So I looked at, what's included in this, I called it an economy starter fare on this airline. So as I looked at it, okay, a seat is included. That's a good step in the right direction. We don't have to stand on this flight, so we actually get a seat. But it was my wife and I traveling on this, exciting trip, and so I wanted to make sure, can I choose my seats ahead of time? Do I have to pay for them? That's okay. I just wanted to know what's the process for selecting our seats, or is it, like airlines where it's open seating, like Southwest Airlines or something like that. So I just wanted to know this information. So this particular airline had a chatbot, a virtual assistant called Jess. So I figured, okay, let me ask Jess. Let's see if I can find out when I can choose my seat. Do I have to pay extra, or when can I actually choose this seat? So I start chatting with Jess, and so I ask Jess, when can I choose my seats with an economy starter fare? That was the fare that I was looking at. So Jess responds, we go back and forth a little bit. I understand you want to add seats. Have you completed your booking? Well, no, not yet. This is what I'm trying to decide. Do I want to book this flight or not? So, like I said, we went back and forth a little bit. So she said, well, to choose your seats, this is how you go about it. But this actually didn't really answer my question. So, Jess didn't really understand what I was asking. Okay, fair enough. Maybe, Jess is programmed with some basic information, no big deal. So then I get to the point where Jess says, okay, please hold on a moment, click here to speak with one of our representatives. Okay, so I get passed over from Jess. Now I get moved over to Jay. So Jay is a live agent with this airline. Jay says, hi, how can I help you today? Well, I've already gone back and forth a little bit with Jess. So naturally, my first question is, well, did you receive the details of my chat with, the virtual assistant Jess? Do you already know what I've been talking about? Probably unsurprisingly. Jay says, I'm sorry, I can't see what you've already been talking about. Let's start all over again, and tell me what I can help you with. So I'm sure we've all had experiences like this. This is in the early stages of these sorts of technologies where, organizations rush to implement these new types of technologies, these, chatbots, but it kind of ends up over in a silo. So then when the customer needs to move over to speak with a live representative, we don't have context that gets carried over and things like that. So how do we start to make this bridge this gap, and how do we start to make this relevant? As Anna said just a moment ago, she said you want to be where your customers are, be on the channels where they are, and that's important to think about when it comes to chatbots and automation. Thinking about how is this buzzword that's out there of omnichannel? How are we recognizing? How are we bringing those sorts of technologies into the fold of an omnichannel world? That, like I said, that's that buzzword that's out there. At Genesys, we use that term pretty carefully, pretty specifically. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but really breaking down that word omnichannel, omni, the prefix meaning all or universal, every. Having all channels together, we need to make sure that virtual assistants can be encapsulated in that customer journey where your customers are moving from one channel to the next and expecting it to be a seamless conversation. So when we think about chatbots, on the website, do you want to offer a bot or a virtual assistant to every customer that turns up on your website? Do you want to offer it to everybody? What if maybe you have a customer that is in the middle of a situation where they've recently had an identity theft situation, and they've called you and already told you, hey, I'm in a situation of identity theft, I've lost my credit card, something like that. Do you want to, if you already know that their account is potentially compromised due to a lost credit card or potential identity theft, do you want to offer them the same self-service options that you would offer to other, customers? So thinking about especially bringing in that context from other channels and recognizing when is the right time to use automation and when should you bypass that option. So thinking about escalation, this is what we just saw in that airline example, and I would almost argue that today it's relatively table stakes. That type of experience where if a bot is handing off to a human and the human has no idea what the bot just talked about, that's really not a great customer experience. That's really not probably what you want your brand to be represented by. So the escalation with context is important. But this is kind of an interesting additional question of if a human needs to be added, how can, not only do we pass over the context, but how can a bot and a human, how can they work hand in hand? And that's, as Stephen was kind of talking about, some of this is kind of science fiction. It seems futuristic, but I want to give some examples of how this can actually be really pretty practical today. It doesn't have to be science fiction. It doesn't really have to be futuristic to have automation and humans working kind of hand in hand. When it comes to virtual assistants, again, if you want to be able to answer the question, what are our customers talking to us about? What are our customers talking to us about this month compared to last month? And what are our customers talking about? That encapsulates all channels, and that encapsulates both interactions with live humans and with virtual agents, with your chatbot technologies. So if you have your speech analytics, over here, and you've got what people are talking to you about over the phone in one area, and then you've got your chat transcripts with live chat agents over here, and then you've got your chatbot solution with what people are chatting with your chatbots about. To be able to combine all that information and say, well, what are our customers talking to us about? That certainly presents challenges to have a holistic view and understand what is happening with your brand and across all channels. So let's start to make this a little bit more relevant. And what I want to do is I want to kind of rethink a little bit about bots. I want to encourage you to think just a little bit differently, and it's more than just a chatbot. So let's think about, what is a chatbot? What does it do? And how can we actually think beyond just, okay, here's a chatbot, we're going to put it on our website, it's going to answer questions for our customers. So at Genesys, we've kind of spent a lot of time thinking about this, developing different types of technology, and there's a concept that we talk about called micro apps. And I think this goes along with what Anna was saying in that you need to kind of start small and you have to use kind of a bite-sized approach. Start out with some small quick wins and things like that. So this concept of a micro app, I want to walk you through what we kind of mean by a micro app. So we see here on a bank website a micro app. We don't know really how we got here or why it's here, but for the sake of this, let's say here we are with a micro app. So this is a micro app that is a payment micro app. And you can think of a micro app really as kind of a prepackaged set of steps that you can offer to your customers. So it's a kind of prepackaged self-service tool, something like making a payment, or things like changing your address, requesting a copy of a statement, changing your PIN number, resetting your password. So these common self-service tasks, we've developed over 80 of these micro apps, many of them directly related to the financial space, when it comes to working with checking accounts, debit cards, statements, and things like that. So let's walk through this. So we have this micro app. So this customer on the website is going to utilize this micro app of making a payment, paying a bill through their bank. So we walk through a couple steps here. The first question we ask them is, how much would you like to pay? Okay, so the customer is going to make a payment of $500. Next question, please enter your credit card number. We're going to actually complete the steps. So this is kind of the prepackaged ability to offer them to make a payment. So they, enter their credit card number. Then we, move along the expiration date, the security code. So these are all the steps of, making a payment. So once we've now completed that micro app, again, I said we don't really even know why we're here yet necessarily, but let's look at how we can use this micro app. So now we have our customer, Tommy, who is chatting with a chatbot. So our customer, Tommy, says, I need to make a payment. So the chatbot recognizes that and says, sure thing. How much would you like to pay? That was actually the first question out of that micro app. So we're now taking that micro app and just exposing it in different ways. We're exposing it now really in more of a conversational type of experience right here within a typical kind of chatbot interface. So the presentation layer of that micro app is now coming in through a conversational dialogue. So you can think of these micro apps as kind of like Lego blocks. You can kind of build your chatbot or your automation type of flow with these micro apps. So now Kate, our chatbot, says, how much would you like to pay? They move along, and the customer says $500, please enter your credit card number. Now we're, moving along in the micro app. So now we've seen using that micro app as a kind of chatbot, but I talked about the idea of blending humans and automation. So this micro app that we saw could be invoked by a chatbot here in a traditional conversational method, but now let's say if our customer is chatting with a live agent. So let's just say they used the live chat feature of the website and got connected to a live agent. So our live agent here is Chris. So the customer says to Chris, hey, I need to make a payment. Now what Chris can do is, from Chris being a live agent, Chris can take that same micro app, or that's kind of a piece of the bot, and actually push that over to Tommy. So Chris says, no problem. In a moment, you'll see our secure payment micro app, and I'm going to push that over to you. We're still connected here in the chat if you have any questions, but due to PCI compliance, we obviously don't want our customer Tommy chatting and saying, here's my credit card number. We're actually going to separate this micro app so we can collect the payment details in a PCI compliant manner. So these micro apps are built once, and the presentation layer, the ability to kind of expose them, is very flexible. You can expose them through chat, you can expose them through a agent pushing them, and they're actually able to be exposed through other channels as well, through Facebook Messenger, through Apple Business Chat, through WhatsApp, through different channels, as well as through the IVR. So this same payment micro app is something that you may want to do over the phone, right through the IVR. So once you've connected this payment micro app to your back-end, payment processing systems, right within the IVR, now it can be exposed. So now it's not about, let's build some automation over here, let's build a chatbot, and then we also have self-service automation in the IVR. You've got more like consistent automation that you can deliver to customers. So these micro apps are really starting to become a powerful way of moving beyond just a bot and moving more towards consistent automation across channels, since they can be used in many different types of ways. So tying that together a little bit more to say, okay, we've got these micro apps, but now there's a lot of talk about natural language understanding, machine learning, being able to actually ingest, free-form text from customers. How do we combine that with these types of micro apps? So let's think about what's the model of a chatbot? Or first, let's take a look at a typical conversation model. If I'm having a conversation with you, or maybe with your bank, with one of your agents, and I need to get something done, what are the steps that we move through in a typical conversation? So first, we have to start the conversation. Next, what that agent says, how can I help you? We need to know what the intent is. And so that's where the customer says, I'd like to pay my bill. So still thinking about the payment example. So that intent determination, that's what your agent would ask, how can I help you today? Next, we need to know who this person is. We have to personalize. We have to understand, okay, if you want to make a payment, who are you? Of course, the personalization could come a little bit before, but generally speaking, this is kind of the flow, the steps that we need to go through. So let me get your account number, and your date of birth to authenticate you, do a little bit of authentication in that step. Your latest bill is $100. Now we need to actually serve the task. So at this point now, we know what the customer needs to do. We know who they are. So now we need to actually accomplish that task. We need to actually help them pay the bill. So here's, give me your credit card number. How are you actually going to pay the bill? And then the final step is there anything else I can help you with? Do we need to escalate over anywhere else? Do I need to, transfer you to another, department? What else can I help you with? So this kind of model, this is what an assisted service type of conversation looks like. So now how do we replicate that with a bot, with automation? So thinking of those same steps of engaging, capturing intent, personalizing, serving the task, then escalating, well, to a certain degree, some of the approach, sort of as Stephen was saying, is this can seem like a complex problem. We need to use artificial intelligence. We need a chatbot, that does full natural language and that can accomplish everything. We want our chatbot to offer self-service. So we're going to apply artificial intelligence across the board. Well, if we kind of step back and we say, well, can we make this a little bit easier on ourselves? Can we start out simple? Can we make this a little bit of a simpler project to tackle? So rather than saying, well, we need artificial intelligence, we need to apply natural language across the board, if we can start to actually look at, there may be times where we can just apply actual natural language understanding or actual artificial intelligence to just that capturing of intent. How can I help you? That's where we need to understand natural language. We need to understand what the customer is actually asking about. But then once we know what they're trying to do, once the bot knows what the intent is, now we can start to make it a little bit more guided. We can start to guide them down a path a little bit more narrowly. So now we can start to use these micro apps. So we can say for the personalized step, for that authentication, who are you, and what's your username and password, or two-factor authentication, sending them an SMS, whatever the case may be. There's several different micro apps that you could use for that personalized step. Then serving the task, collecting the payment details. We don't necessarily need artificial intelligence to determine what are the steps of making a payment. We don't really need to learn about the different ways of collecting payment details or changing your address. You want them to give you the street name, the street number, the city, the state, or country, and postal code and things like that. So those micro apps kind of keep the guardrails on when you need to reach that step. The escalation then could go over, to an agent along with context. So then even thinking a little bit differently about this, so we could say, we could use a couple micro apps, but there may be ways of also incorporating other pieces of technology. So we may use a micro app to first authenticate. And from the Genesys approach, this is actually kind of an open approach that we have. So we've developed a fair number of these sorts of micro apps and automation capabilities, but we don't do everything. We're not going to claim that we do everything. So maybe there's there's a fraud detection service, some automation that can provide some fraud detection. So we may want to call out to a fraud detection service and use that as part of that step. Then maybe use the micro app. Then maybe we have an agent that pushes, another micro app over to the customer. So starting to kind of break this down a little bit, and this is kind of the progression of maybe complexity. I would say you wouldn't start with multiple different, integrating multiple different services for your chatbot, but you can start to expand in this type of model. There could be things like image processing services to deposit checks or things like that to validate somebody's driver's license for their identity. There may be ways of kind of piecing together different technologies and different pieces of automation that can accomplish really the 5-step process that we see here. So like I had mentioned, the way that Genesys approaches this, when we talk about that buzzword of omnichannel, when we say, when we use that term, it's like I said, it's out there all the time. It's at every industry event, you see that word, everywhere. The way that we approach this single box there that's in the middle, it's a very simple shape to put in PowerPoint, very simple to draw a white box with an orange outline. But it actually is very significant to the way that we approach these sorts of challenges. This single box here, this centralized routing and reporting engine, this single reporting engine is now what lets us bring in that context when we start thinking about bots. So whether we're thinking about traditional channels like web chat or voice or email, or some of these emerging messaging channels like WeChat, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Twitter, bringing all of those again into that single routing engine, single reporting engine, that kind of actual omni-channel, having all channels there in one place, that allows us to take any interaction and deliver it either to a human agent or to a bot. And so now we can think about if the customer is chatting on the website and starts to chat with a bot, whether it's created within Genesys or thinking about using other types of technology, if the customer chats with the bot and then escalates over to the human is going to have that context about what they spoke about. So that's kind of the table stakes that I mentioned at the beginning of the session, where we need to pass over the context. But let's also think about the example of if the customer chats with a bot today, if one of your customers chats with your bot and completes a self-service transaction, if they actually change their address or make a payment or check their balance, then next week they pick up the phone and call in and speak with a human. And they say, well, I just changed my address. Your bot did it for me. And if that agent, that human agent, can't see, well, the bot, we have our siloed bot solution, I can't see the transcript of what you chatted with our bot about, that creates a disconnected customer experience. So thinking about all of that, together, that's sort of the approach that we want to encourage you to consider with bringing artificial intelligence, with bringing bots into this omni-channel type of perspective. There's a term that we use called blended AI, being able to blend, that's having humans and bots kind of working together, where bots can offer suggestions to humans, can offer micro apps, the humans can pass the micro apps over to the customers. So that's kind of the concept of blended AI that we talk a lot about at Genesys. So wrapping up with 3 key points, 3 key lessons to kind of take away, it's critical to think about not just this buzzword of omni-channel, yeah, we have all our channels, we are where our customers want to be, but making sure that it's tied together, making sure that it's connected with the context, so that when you start implementing automation and chatbots, that it's in the fold of what your customers expect when they move from one channel to the next. Start to think, again, beyond just a single chatbot of this, this single complicated bot that's going to try to do everything. Start thinking about that bite-sized approach. Okay, we can piece together a couple micro apps. We can use these, in different ways to start out small. And as Anna said, maybe you're going to fail a little bit along the way, and you're going to learn about how to leverage those. And then finally, start to blur the line between automation, which certainly has some great benefits, but as you all know, your financial institutions, you have a brand that you all feel very strongly about. You want to represent your brand appropriately to your customers. So the power of the human touch is not going away. Automation has some great capabilities, but being able to incorporate the best of both worlds, having the power of the human touch in conjunction with the automation that you're starting to leverage is absolutely critical. So Genesys, our booth is just outside the door, so feel free to stop by to ask us any more questions. We'd love to speak with you a little bit further. So thanks so much.